could you be so reckless?
Sir, we must contain this immediately.
This mess is entirely of your making, sir.
The door to her father's study was not fully closed. Clara Ashford stood in the dim hallway outside it, her hand raised to knock, and heard her own name spoken in a voice she did not recognize. Not her father's papery rasp. A smoother voice. A voice that had practiced being charming the way a man practices a card trick, until the mechanics become invisible and only the result remains. "The girl," the smooth voice said. "Describe her again." A pause. The scratch of a chair being pushed back. "Presentable," her father said. "Fine bones, the Ashford eyes. She reads too much, but that can be managed. She doesn't make scenes." "Doesn't make scenes," the smooth voice repeated, as though tasting the phrase. "Docile, then." "Disciplined," her father corrected. There was a faint note of pride in it. Clara recognized the tone. It was the same one he used when describing a horse he was trying to sell. "She will not embarrass you. She understands her position." And if the primary arrangement collapses, if Windermere grows bored or the marriage proves inconvenient within the year? Clara's hand lowered slowly from the door. "Then the secondary clause holds," her father said. "You have my word, Linfield, and the signature." A silence. Then the sound of crystal against crystal, 2 glasses being raised. Clara pushed the door open. The study smelled of stale gin and wood rot. Her father sat behind his mahogany desk, his ledger open, his face instantly rearranging itself into something approximating authority. The man across from him was tall, well-dressed, with the particular kind of handsomeness that had curdled slightly at the edges, a jaw too sharp, eyes that moved too quickly. He was perhaps 40. He looked at Clara the way a man looks at a property line. "Clara." Her father set down his glass. "This is Viscount Linfield. He is an associate." "I know who he is," Clara said. Her voice surprised her. It came out level, without the tremor she had expected. She looked at Linfield. "You hold my father's debt." Linfield smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "A portion of it. And in exchange for that portion," Clara said, "my father has promised you a secondary claim on me. If the Duke of Windermir finds me unsuitable within the year, I transfer to your arrangement instead." The silence that followed was absolute. Her father's face went a complicated shade of red. "You were listening at the door," he said. "The door was open," Clara replied. She turned to look at her father fully. The bloodshot eyes, the sagging skin beneath them, the hands that had once bounced her on a knee before the gambling tables became more interesting than children. She had stopped being angry at him years ago. Anger required hope. "How much does Linfield hold?" "Clara, this is not the time." "How much?" Her father looked at his desk. 4,000. She looked at Linfield. "And the Duke of Windermere is paying how much in total settlement?" 12, Linfield said, with the air of a man who is enjoying himself. Clara turned back to her father. "So, you sold me to cover 12, and then sold me again to cover 4 more, and did not think to mention the second transaction." She paused. "I am not angry. I want you to understand that. I stopped expecting better from you when I was 14, and you sold my mother's pearls to cover a debt at White's, and told her they were being cleaned." She picked up her gloves from the table near the door, where she had set them on her way in. "I will marry the Duke of Windermere. I will manage his household and produce his heirs, and be an entirely satisfactory duchess. But I want something made clear between us now, while Linfield is here to witness it. She pulled on the first glove, smoothing each finger with deliberate calm. If the secondary clause is ever activated, if any claim is ever made on me outside of my marriage to Windermere, I will go directly to the Duke's solicitors with every document I can find regarding your finances, including the ones you keep behind the loose brick in the east wall of this room. I have known about that brick since I was 11. She pulled on the second glove. I trust that makes my position clear. She walked out of the study. The door clicked shut behind her. In the hallway, she stood with her back against the plaster wall. Her hands were shaking inside the gloves. She pressed them flat against her thighs until they stopped. She met the Duke of Windermere 3 days later, at a reception in Mayfair that she would have given a great deal to avoid. He was nothing like what she had prepared herself for. The gossip columns had constructed a portrait over the years, a soft, preening creature draped in foreign silks, decadent and vaguely tragic, more interested in his Italian travels than in anything so crude as the responsibilities of his title. Clara Ashford had read the columns with the same detached pragmatism she applied to everything else. She had prepared herself accordingly for a man of decorative uselessness. Theodore Fitzroy, the 4th Duke of Windermere, was not that man. He was tall in the way that suggested not height, but density. The kind of person who occupied space differently from other people, as though he had been built from heavier material. His coat was dark and severely cut. His cravat was plain. He wore no rings, no watch chain. His face was angular, weathered slightly, deeply tired in the way of someone who has been tired for a very long time and has stopped expecting that to change. He moved through the crowded room with the particular stillness of a man who has made peace with the fact that he does not belong here and has stopped pretending otherwise. He stopped in front of her. He bowed precisely. "Lady Clara Ashford." "Your Grace," she curtsied. "Would you walk with me?" He did not look at her mother, who was vibrating at Clara Ashford's elbow with barely suppressed excitement. He looked only at Clara Ashford, with pale gray eyes that she recognized immediately. Not because she had seen them before, but because she had seen that expression before. It was the expression of someone counting the cost of every social interaction and finding the sum exhausting. She placed her hand on his forearm. They walked away from the noise. At the edge of the terrace, he stopped. The night air was cold and clean, a relief after the suffocating press of silk and sweat inside. "I detest these things," he said. He was looking out at the dark garden. "So do I," Clara Ashford replied. He turned his head fractionally. "You don't need to agree with me to make a favorable impression. I'm not looking for agreement." "I'm not trying to make a favorable impression," Clara Ashford said. "I find them exhausting and mostly dishonest. We have arrived at the same conclusion independently. That is not agreement. It is coincidence." He looked at her fully then. Something shifted in his face, too small and too fast to name. "What do you want from this arrangement?" he asked. Truthfully. She had been asked that question before, in various forms, by her mother, by distant relatives, by society women who had decided to feel sorry for her. No one had ever asked it as though the answer genuinely mattered. "Somewhere quiet," Clara Ashford said. "A household to manage. Work that means something, and to be left alone to do it without someone requiring me to perform gratitude for the privilege." She paused. "What do you want?" He was quiet for a moment. Below them, the sounds of the reception drifted out through the tall windows. Laughter, music, the clink of crystal. "The same," he said, "and someone who will not look at me with either pity or contempt." I'm not capable of pity, Clara Ara said, and I reserve contempt for people who have earned it. You have not done so yet. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was, Clara Ara realized, the first easy silence she had occupied in years. We understand each other then, he said. Perfectly. The engagement lasted 3 weeks. The wedding was small, cold, and entirely unremarkable. Held in a drafty stone church with an echo problem and a priest who read the Latin too fast. Clara Ara's mother cried. Her father did not attend. He sent a note claiming a prior engagement, which was almost certainly true, and almost certainly involved a card table. Theodore stood beside her at the altar, a pillar of dark broadcloth, his hands ice-cold when he slid the ring onto her finger. He did not look at her when he spoke his vows. He spoke them to the air in front of him, in a steady voice, like a man reading the terms of a contract he has already accepted, and sees no point in disputing. Clara Ara spoke hers the same way. The carriage door closed. The horses moved. London dissolved behind them into grey rain. She did not look back. There was nothing there worth looking back for. What she was looking toward, she didn't know yet. But for the first time in her memory, the not knowing did not frighten her. She had chosen this. Out of the narrowest possible range of options, she had chosen. It was a small and fragile thing, that distinction, but she held it carefully, like a coin with no denomination that might still, someday, prove to be currency. So, 2,1598. Jang Viet, Tiep, Jajat, San, 13,980. The journey north took 4 days. The first 2 passed in the thick, careful silence of 2 people who have agreed to share their lives and are now discovering what that actually means in the confines of a carriage. Theodore slept badly. She could tell by the way he sat, too alert for rest, his eyes closed but his jaw never fully unclenching. On the second evening, when the rain had turned the roads to rivers of mud and the carriage lurched badly enough to throw them both sideways, he caught her arm before she could fall. His grip was instantaneous and entirely secure. He did not comment on it afterward. Neither did she. On the third morning, somewhere north of Leeds, the rain finally stopped. The light that replaced it was pale and extraordinary, a flat winter brightness that turned the hills to hammered silver. Clara Ara pressed her hand against the cold glass of the window, watching the landscape change. The neat hedgerows of the south fell away. The land opened, widened, became something older and less managed, and she felt something shift in her chest at the sight of it. A loosening, like the first breath after weeks of shallow breathing. "You like the north," Theodore said. He was watching her face. "I like that it doesn't look like anywhere I've been before," Clara Ara said. He was quiet for a moment. "William hated it," he said. "He said it was a wilderness. He preferred Bath." It was the first time he had mentioned his brother unprompted. Clara Ara did not move. "And you?" she asked. "I came back here after Rome," Theodore said, "and I stood at the edge of the moors on the morning I arrived. And I thought, no one can find me here who doesn't already know where I am." He paused. "I realize that is not a conventional recommendation for a family estate." "It sounds," Clara Ara said carefully, "like exactly the right kind of place." He looked at her. Outside, the light was still that extraordinary hammered silver. In it, his gray eyes were almost translucent. "Yes," he said, "it does." Ironwood Hall rose out of the moors at dusk like something that had grown there rather than been built. Dark stone, narrow windows, towers that met the sky without apology. It was not beautiful in any way London would recognize. It was something better. It was real. Clara Ara stepped out of the carriage and stood in the courtyard and looked up at it, and the knot in her chest, that had been there for as long as she could remember, loosened one more turn. The staff lined the entrance hall. They were older, quieter, and they looked at her not with the disdain she had expected, but with a cautious, careful hope. The look of people who have been waiting a long time for something they were afraid to name. "Show the Duchess to her rooms," Theodore told the housekeeper, a spare, upright woman named Mrs. Gable. "She is exhausted." He disappeared toward his study. Clara Ara followed Mrs. Gable up the stairs. She bathed, she ate, she sat on the edge of the massive four-poster bed in her plain white nightgown, and she looked at the connecting door, and she breathed. Whatever came next, she was ready for it. The knock came an hour later. Soft, almost hesitant, 2 deliberate raps against the heavy oak. She crossed the cold floor and opened the door. Theodore stood in the threshold, stripped of his coat, his cravat gone, a single candle in his hand casting long shadows across the angles of his face. He looked, without his formal armor, like a different man. Not diminished, but clarified, the way a landscape looks clearer after rain. "May I come in?" he asked. "Yes," Clara Ara said. He set the candle on the table. He turned to face her, his hands in his pockets, and he stood there for a long moment, looking at the floorboards between them. "There are things I have not told you," he said, "about this house, about my brother, about why I have allowed certain stories to persist." He looked up. "I had intended to wait, to let you settle, but I find I cannot be in the same house with you and continue to be something other than honest." Clara Ara looked at the man her father had sold her to, and she thought, here is someone else who has been managing the distance between themselves and the world for a very long time. "Then be honest," she said. He was. It took the better part of an hour. He told her about William. Not just the death, but the debts, the squandered rents, the tenant families who had gone without coal the winter before he died. He told her about Rome, and what it was to be the spare, and what it cost to come back and become the thing you never trained for. He told her about the rumors, how they had started as accident and become strategy, a shield against a world that needed him to be either a William replacement or a cautionary tale, and could not conceive of a third option. He told her about Linfield. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. "He was at your father's house," Theodore said. "I know he was. I have seen the correspondence." Clara Ara was very still. "He holds a secondary claim," she said. "On me. If the marriage fails within the year." Theodore's jaw tightened. The candle flame bent sideways in an unfelt draft. "I know," he said. "You knew before the wedding." "Yes? And you married me anyway." "I married you," Theodore said quietly, "because you walked into that study and told your father, in front of Linfield, exactly what you would do if the clause was ever activated. And then you put on your gloves and walked out." He paused. "I was in the hallway, Clara Ara. I had arrived early for our meeting. I heard every word." She looked at him for a long moment. "You needed a duchess who wasn't afraid of Linfield," she said. "I needed someone who could stand in the same room as that man," Theodore said, "and not flinch." The gray eyes held hers. "But that is not why I am in this room tonight." He crossed to her then, unhurried, and when he raised his hands to either side of her face, not touching, hovering, waiting, She understood that this too was a question, and that he would take any answer she gave him without rancor. She answered it by pulling him down to meet her. Lord Weston arrived on a Tuesday in October with a quantity of luggage disproportionate to his slight frame, and the expression of a man who has survived a natural disaster and is not yet certain it is over. "Theodore?" He dropped his bag in the entrance hall without ceremony, pushed his spectacles up his nose with one finger, and looked around at the stone walls with the expression of a man confronting a confirmed geological suspicion. "I have been on a road for 11 hours. There was a pothole outside Harrogate that I believe has permanently realigned my spine. I require brandy, a fire, and the immediate company of someone who will not ask me about the weather." "Mrs. Gable has brandy waiting in the blue room," Theodore said from the top of the stairs. He was smiling. Not the phantom fraction of a smile Clara Ashford had catalogued at the theatre in London, but something fuller, unguarded, the expression of a man who is genuinely glad to see someone. He came down the stairs and clapped Thomas on the shoulder, with enough force to make the smaller man stagger. "You look terrible." "I feel terrible. The roads north of Leeds are a moral failing." Thomas righted himself, adjusted his spectacles again, and looked past Theodore. He stopped. Clara Ashford stood in the doorway of the library. She had been reorganizing the estate correspondence when she heard the carriage. 3 months of invoices sorted by quarter, the system she had imposed now extending to the household accounts as well. She was wearing a practical day dress of dark blue wool, her hair pinned simply, her hands still faintly ink-stained. Thomas Weston stared at her as though he had encountered a weather phenomenon not listed in any of his reference materials. Theodore turned. "Thomas, this is my wife, Clara Ashford. Lord Thomas Weston." Thomas performed a bow so swift and rigid it was nearly a flinch. "Your Grace, yes, an honor. I apologize for my appearance. The roads—" "I heard about the roads," Clara Ashford said. Her voice was warm. She had made a decision about Thomas Weston 3 weeks before his arrival, when she had read the stack of his letters in Theodore's study and formed a clear picture of the man behind them. Meticulous, passionate about obscure subjects, constitutionally incapable of social ease, and, from the careful way Theodore's handwriting changed in his replies, becoming slightly less controlled, slightly more itself, one of the very few people her husband trusted. "Theodore mentioned you are working on a translation of Vitruvius. I have been looking for someone to argue with me about the domestic architecture chapters." Thomas blinked. His spectacles slipped. "You have read Vitruvius?" "I have read everything in this library," Clara Ashford said. "It is a very good library, and the winters here are long. Come in out of the cold. Mrs. Gable will be insulted if the brandy goes warm." Thomas came. He settled into the estate with the slightly dazed gratitude of a man who had not expected to be welcomed and did not quite know what to do with the experience. He and Theodore occupied the study for hours at a stretch, maps unrolled across the floor, arguing in the cheerful, combative way of people who disagree about things that matter to them. Clara Ashford worked at her own desk at the end of the room. She did not withdraw, as society dictated she should. No one suggested she should. It was on the 4th day of Thomas's visit that Linfield came. He arrived without prior notice in a carriage bearing a crest she recognized. The excuse offered by his man at the door was transparently hollow. A squall on the road, a need for shelter, the hospitality of a neighbor gratefully accepted. There were 3 inns between the main road and Ironwood Hall. Clara Ashford knew because she had reviewed the estate maps that first month and memorized the surrounding geography with the same systematic attention she gave to all things that might become relevant. She was in the entrance hall when he was shown in, and she watched his eyes move, quick, precise, a surveyor's assessment, across the room, across Mrs. Gable, across Thomas, across the fireplace, before they landed on her. "Duchess," he bowed. "What a picture of domestic contentment. The North agrees with you." "Viscount Linfield." She did not smile. She did not smile either. She held a precise, neutral expression that gave him nothing. What an unexpected visit. He found a seat in the parlor. He accepted tea he hadn't asked for. He talked about London, about the season, about parliamentary matters in the tone of a man who expects to be found interesting. And Clara watched him the way she had learned to watch her father's creditors, waiting for the thing they had actually come to say. It came when Theodore left the room to speak with the steward. Linfield leaned forward. The performative warmth drained from his face with the efficiency of water leaving a vessel. "Your father sends his regards," he said, low enough that Thomas, who had retreated to the corner with a book, could not hear. "My father is welcome to keep them," Clara said. "He is in some difficulty," Linfield continued. "New debts. The tables have not been kind. He came to me recently, in need of relief." He paused, watching her face. He was very forthcoming about a great many things in exchange for that relief. About your husband, specifically. About what Windermere has been doing with his time since he returned from Italy. Clara set down her teacup. "I'm not certain what you mean," she said. "I think you are," Linfield said. "I think you are a very intelligent woman in a very difficult position. I came to offer you a way out of it." He smiled. It was the same smile from her father's study. "The secondary clause still holds, Duchess. Your father confirmed it. If you were to find this arrangement unsatisfactory, if you were to indicate formally that the marriage had not met the terms agreed, I suggest," Clara said, "that you be very careful about the next sentence you speak in this house." He studied her for a moment, something recalculated behind his eyes. "Your father also mentioned," he said carefully, "that your husband has been making inquiries about William Fitzroy, about the circumstances of his death." He paused. "That is a dangerous thread to pull, Duchess, for everyone involved." The fire in the hearth crackled. Thomas turned a page in his corner. Clara looked at Linfield with an expression as flat and cold as the moors outside the window. "Thank you for stopping by," she said. "I hope the road improves." Linfield left before dinner. His carriage wheels crunched over the gravel, and the sound faded into the dark. Theodore came to find her an hour later. She was standing at the window of the study, watching the last of the light leave the sky. She heard him come in. She heard him stop. "He spoke to you," Theodore said. It was not a question. "Yes." A pause. "What did he say?" Clara turned around. She looked at her husband, the man who had held her in the dark of Ironwood and been, for the first time in her life, entirely honest. She thought about the things he had told her that first night, and the things he had not. "He said you have been making inquiries about your brother," she said, "about how William died." The silence that followed had weight. Theodore looked at the fireplace. A muscle moved in his jaw. "Yes," he said finally, "and you did not tell me. I was trying to protect you." "From what?" She kept her voice level. There was no point in anger. Not yet. Not until she understood the shape of what she was dealing with. "Theodore, what did Linfield do?" He crossed the room. He sat down in the chair across from her desk. Not behind his own desk, but in front of hers, which she noticed, which she catalogued as she catalogued everything about him. He rested his forearms on his knees and looked at his hands. "William's accident," he said. "The fence he was riding when his horse refused, and he broke his neck. The fence had been tampered with. The gate had been loosened on one side so the horse would balk and throw him. The groom who found it told no one. He was afraid." He paused. "Linfield wanted the Ironwood estate, specifically the south acreage. There is coal beneath it, a significant seam. William had gambling debts. Linfield had been buying them, quietly, for years, waiting for William to be desperate enough to sell. But William died before he could be made desperate enough." A long breath. "The title and entail passed to me. I am not William. I do not gamble. I do not make desperate decisions under pressure. Linfield realized almost immediately that I could not be bought or cornered. So he changed tactics. He went after your reputation instead," Clara Ashford said. "He fed the existing rumors to the press. He cultivated sources inside my household. Servants who were let go eventually, but not before the damage was done." Theodore looked up. His pale eyes were steady, but not entirely calm. "I have been building a case for 3 years, Clara Ashford, quietly, without anyone knowing what I was looking for or why. The case is almost complete." "Almost," she said. "There is one document I cannot find. A letter from Linfield to the groom, written 2 days before the accident. The groom died last winter, consumption, but he left papers. I believe the letter is among them. His widow lives in Northumberland. I was planning to send someone in the spring." Clara Ashford was quiet for a long moment. "And my father," she said. "He told Linfield about the investigation." "He told Linfield," Theodore said, "the day before Linfield arrived here." She looked at the window. The sky was entirely dark now. The moors were invisible, swallowed by the night. Her father had sold her once for £12,000. He had sold her again, presumably for considerably less, because the price of a secret was always lower than the price of a person. She had known what he was. She had known it since she was 14. But there was a difference, she was discovering, between knowing something and feeling the weight of it in your chest at precisely this moment, in precisely this room. She breathed through it. She let it settle. "Then we need to move faster," she said. Theodore looked at her. "The widow in Northumberland," Clara Ashford said. "The groom's papers. We cannot wait until spring." She reached for the estate correspondence at the edge of her desk, the organized stacks she had rebuilt from 3 years of disorder, and began moving them aside to make room for something new. "Tell me everything you know about the widow. Her name, the address, what she knows, what she doesn't. If Linfield is already moving, we have less time than you think." Theodore stared at her for a moment with an expression she was beginning to recognize. The particular mixture of relief and something rawer. Something that had no dignified name in the vocabulary of aristocratic men. "You are not going to tell me I should have been honest with you sooner," he said. "I am absolutely going to tell you that," Clara Ashford said, pulling a fresh sheet of paper toward her. "Later, after we have solved the immediate problem." She looked up. "Start talking." The letter from her father arrived on a Friday, 3 weeks after Linfield's visit. Clara Ashford was in the kitchen garden when Mrs. Gable brought it out. She had been overseeing the winterizing of the herb beds, a task she found meditative in the way that all purely physical work was meditative, requiring exactly enough attention to crowd out thought. The sky was the color of pewter. Her breath fogged in the cold air. She pulled off her gloves and took the envelope. She recognized the handwriting. She did not open it immediately. She stood there a moment longer, a dry stem of rosemary in one hand and the letter in the other, and she looked out over the moors, at the silver-gray distance and the low clouds and the particular absolute silence of ironwood in winter. Then she opened it. Clara Ara, Linfield has moved faster than I anticipated. He has filed papers with the Land Committee in Leeds. An act of enclosure for the south acreage of the Ironwood estate on grounds of managerial neglect. The committee hearing is in 6 weeks. You do not understand what Windermere has done. He has made an enemy of a man with the patience and resources of a glacier. What your husband calls an investigation, Linfield calls an act of war. If Windermere presents his case to the wrong people at the wrong time, Linfield will not merely defend himself, he will destroy everything in reach. The estate, the tenants, your name, my name. I am asking you, as your father, to speak to your husband. Tell him to let the matter of William rest. The dead are dead. The living must arrange themselves accordingly. If Windermere cannot be persuaded, then I must consider my own position. Linfield has asked me to provide a sworn statement. Certain financial conversations. Certain things said between men in private rooms that, removed from context, might suggest your husband's fitness for his responsibilities is not what it appears. I do not wish to do this, Clara Ara. I am asking you, first, to prevent its necessity. Your father. She read it twice. Then she folded it precisely along its original creases and slid it back into the envelope. She went inside. She hung up her coat. She washed the garden soil from her hands at the kitchen basin, working methodically, not hurrying. Then she climbed the stairs to the study, where she knew Theodore would be working. He looked up when she opened the door. One glance at her face, and he put down his pen. She set the letter on the desk in front of him. She stood by the window while he read it. The fire was the only sound in the room. Outside, the first snow of the season had begun. Not dramatic, not a storm, just a quiet and implacable descent of white that covered the moors in something too soft to be called silence. He will do it, Theodore said. His voice was entirely flat. Yes. A sworn statement from your father, with his name and his connections. It would not be conclusive, but it would be enough to raise doubts at the Land Committee. Enough to delay proceedings. Enough to give Linfield time to push the Enclosure Act through before I can... He stopped. Before we can present the countervailing evidence. The widow in Northumberland, Clara Ara said. Have you heard back from your solicitor? He is still negotiating access to the papers. Theodore set the letter down. It will be another 3 weeks at minimum. Clara Ara turned from the window. She had thought about this in the 12 minutes since she had read the letter, with the particular focus she brought to problems that required solution rather than feeling. The shape of the problem was clear. Linfield would file, her father would testify, the committee would delay, and the Enclosure Act would pass before the evidence could be produced. 200 tenant families would lose the land they had farmed for 3 generations. The coal beneath the south acreage would be stripped out in 5 years, the land rendered useless, the proceeds flowing to Linfield and men like him. And the alternative she was considering was the kind of thing she would need to do without telling Theodore, because Theodore would not allow it. I could go to Linfield, she said. Theodore's head came up. Not to bargain, Clara Ara said quickly. Not to retreat, but to speak with him directly, in a setting he does not control, and obtain something of use. She moved to the desk. He underestimates me. He has from the beginning. You saw it when he visited. He believes I am manageable, persuadable. If I approach him privately, as a wife attempting to negotiate her husband into reasonableness, he will talk. Men like Linfield always talk to people they believe are beneath them. And when men like Linfield talk, they reveal things. Clara Ara, he is staying at the Northfield Inn in Harrogate, she said. His solicitor's office is on Mill Street. I could be there and back in a day and a half. No. Theodore's voice was low and absolute. If he has something to say that he has not yet said. If he discovers what you are actually doing, Theodore said, he will not use you to negotiate. He will use you to destroy me. He is not a man you meet in a room alone, Clara Ara. Whatever advantage you think you can manufacture. I think I can make him angry, Clara Ara said. Angry men confirm things. Angry men say the names of people they are trying to protect. Angry men are dangerous, Theodore said. He stood up. He was not raised his voice. That was the thing about Theodore. He never raised his voice, which meant when his tone changed, the change carried more weight than shouting would have. He walked around the desk and stopped in front of her. I am asking you not to do this. She looked at him. She looked at the lines in his face, the exhaustion that lived there permanently, the gray eyes that had looked at her with absolute clarity from the first night in this house. All right, she said. He let out a breath. His hand came up to cup her face briefly, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. We will find another way. She nodded. She waited 4 days. Then she went. She told herself it was not deception. She had said she would not go to Linfield, and she did not. She went to Harrogate. She found the solicitor's office on Mill Street and sat in the waiting room for 40 minutes, with her most anonymous hat and her second-best gloves, presenting herself as Mrs. Thornwick, the wife of a local landowner with a boundary dispute. And when the clerk, bored and overworked, left the outer office to chase a misfiled document, she read the case documents left open on his desk with the rapid, systematic efficiency of a woman who had been managing estate accounts for months and knew how to extract information quickly from dense legal text. She found one thing, one name, a name in a deposition filed 6 months ago, a witness to a conversation between Linfield and the groom the week before William's accident. The witness was alive. He lived in Skipton, 19 miles south. She had what she came for. She left before the clerk returned. She was back at Ironwood before dark. She told herself she would tell Theodore in the morning. She told herself that was not the same as lying. She should have known that Linfield had someone watching the road. The Morning Post arrived with a letter addressed to Theodore. A formal note on solicitor's paper, brief and precise. Linfield was filing a formal complaint with the Duke of Windermir's land agent, claiming that the Duchess of Windermir had been observed at the offices of opposing counsel, apparently reviewing confidential case documents. Attached was a statement from the clerk, signed and witnessed. Theodore read it standing in the entrance hall, still in his riding coat, just returned from the South Fields. Clara Ara watched his face. She watched him absorb it, watched the initial stillness, then the controlled stillness that was something else entirely. The stillness of a person applying every resource they have to not showing what they are feeling. He looked up. You went to Harrogate, he said. Yes. To the solicitor's office. Yes. He looked back at the letter. He set it very carefully on the side table as though it might break. I asked you not to. You did, Clara Ara said. And I believed I had found a way to do something useful without... I was wrong. I was wrong about whether it could be done safely. and I should have told you what I had found before acting on it. That is the thing I regret, not the going, the not telling you." Theodore did not answer. He walked to the end of the entrance hall. He stood with his back to her, his hand on the stone of the window frame. She waited. "Linfield will use this," he said finally. "He will argue that the Duchess of Windermere was engaged in improper interference with a civil proceeding. That is grounds for dismissal of any evidence I present, if it can be argued that I obtained it through her illegal access to opposing counsel's documents." He paused. "It does not matter that you found nothing of use. What matters is that he can argue that you might have." Clara Ashford was quiet. "You have given him a weapon," Theodore said, "and he will use it against both of us." He did not turn around. He walked to the stairs and climbed them and closed the door to the study. And the sound of it, not slammed, just closed, just firmly and finally shut, echoed in the stone hallway long after he was gone. Clara Ashford stood in the entrance hall. Mrs. Gable appeared at the kitchen door, took one look at her face, and silently retreated. Clara Ashford sat down on the bench near the front door, the old wooden bench that had probably held the coats of Fitzroy dukes for 2 centuries. And she sat with her hands in her lap, and she looked at the floor. She had been wrong. Not about the instinct. She still believed the trip to Harrogate had been rational, but about the method. She had acted on information Theodore had not shared with her, and then had not shared her actions with him, and in doing so, she had replicated the exact dynamic she had resented in him. Deciding alone, acting alone, protecting the other person by excluding them. She had, in other words, become her father. That thought settled into her chest like a stone. Outside, the snow had resumed. She could hear it. Not sound exactly, but the particular quality of silence that snow produces. A thickening of the air, a muffling of distance. Ironwood Hall was very quiet. The fire in the grate crackled once and settled. She was alone. Not the London kind of alone. Not the alone of a crowded drawing room where no one sees you. Not the alone of a family that looks straight through you. This was different. This was the alone of having damaged something real. Something she had been careful with, that she had wanted to keep, that she had broken through her own stubbornness and her own need to be competent in a situation where the right move would have been to trust someone else. Theodore's voice from 2 nights ago. "I was trying to protect you." She understood it now. She had understood it intellectually then, and she understood it in her chest now. The way you understand falling only when you are already in the air. The fire crackled again. She stayed on that bench until her back ached, and the afternoon light had shifted to early evening gray, and she did not cry, because crying would have been too simple. What she felt was more complicated than grief, and less clean than anger. It was the particular specific weight of knowing you have made a mistake that cannot be unmade, only repaired, and that you do not yet know if the person you have wronged will allow you to repair it. She got up, finally, when Mrs. Gable appeared with a lamp and a look of such careful blankness that Clara Ashford understood the housekeeper had seen exactly this shape of difficulty before. In this house, with the previous generation, and possibly the one before that, and had made her peace with the fact that love between stubborn people was not a smooth business. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable," Clara Ashford said. "Supper is at 7, Your Grace," Mrs. Gable said. "His Grace has not yet come down." "I know," Clara Ashford said. "I will go up." She knocked on the study door. There was a long pause. Then, "Come in." He was sitting at his desk. He had not lit many candles. The room was dim, the fire burned low. He looked at her when she entered, and his face was the closed, carved thing she remembered from London, from those first weeks. The Duke's face, the armor. She sat down in the chair across from him, uninvited, and she said, "I went to Harrogate to find the name of a witness. I found it. His name is Aldred Hoe. He lives in Skipton. He was present for a conversation between Linfield and your brother's groom the week before William's accident. He is alive, and he has not been found by Linfield because Linfield does not know he exists." She paused. "I should have told you as soon as I returned. I did not, because I was afraid you would say I had risked too much for too little, and I was not ready to hear that. That was cowardice. I am telling you now." Theodore looked at her for a long time. "Aldred Hoe," he said. "Skipton. I do not have his address, but the village is small. Your solicitor could locate him in a day." Another long silence. Outside the study window, the snow was still coming down. Steady, quiet, implacable. "I owe you an apology," Theodore said. "I kept the investigation from you for months. I told myself it was to protect you. It was partly to protect you. It was also partly, I was afraid that if you understood the full scope of what Linfield was capable of, you would—" He stopped. "Leave," Clara said. "Yes." She looked at him. This man, this difficult, damaged, extraordinary man, who had spent 3 years building a case in silence because he was afraid of being abandoned by someone he had not yet met. "I am not going anywhere," Clara said. "You may not have the choice," Theodore said, "if Linfield succeeds in having the committee dismiss my standing." "I am not talking about the committee," Clara said. "I am talking about you and me in this room right now. I am telling you I am not going anywhere. The rest of it, Linfield, the committee, the Enclosure Act, my father, we will solve all of that. Together. Beginning with Aldred Hoe in Skipton." He looked at her. The armor was still there, but cracked now, along lines she could trace. "I told you," he said quietly, "the night I came to your room, that if I stay, it is because you want me here. And I'm telling you the same," Clara said. "If I stay, Theodore, I'm staying. The door between us is open from both sides. That was the arrangement. That is still the arrangement." Something in his face shifted. Not the armor breaking, the armor being set aside deliberately. A choice rather than a collapse. He reached across the desk and covered her hand with his. Outside, the snow continued to fall over the moors, covering everything in a silence so complete, it felt like beginning. The hearing was in Leeds, in a stone building on the north end of the city that smelled of damp wool and institutional authority. Clara arrived 40 minutes before it was scheduled to begin. She had not told Theodore where she was going. She had told him she was taking the carriage to call on Mrs. Radcliffe, the wife of the South Acreage steward, who had been unwell. This was true. She intended to call on Mrs. Radcliffe afterward. She had simply omitted the part that came before. She had spent the 2 weeks since the night of Aldred Hoe's name working, quietly and systematically, from every available angle. Theodore's solicitor had found the man in Skipton. Hoe had been reluctant, then less reluctant, then willing, when it became clear that what he had witnessed had been eating at him for 3 years, and that someone was finally asking. His statement was signed and witnessed and sitting in Theodore's solicitor's strongbox. But a statement from a witness of uncertain status, a former stable hand, no family connections, no social standing, was not, by itself, enough to counter a sworn affidavit from a viscount. Linfield knew that. Linfield was counting on that. What Linfield did not know was that Clara Ashford had found a second thread. She had found it in the financial records she had been organizing for months. Not the estate records, but the records of her father's debts, which she had obtained quietly and legally through a solicitor in London, because she had known from the beginning that understanding the full scope of her father's obligations was the only way to understand the full scope of her own situation. In those records, specifically, in a ledger of payments made by Linfield to her father over a period of 4 years, there was a pattern of deposits that did not correspond to any legitimate transaction. Not gambling debts, not loans, regular payments, quarterly, beginning 3 months after William Fitzroy's death. Payment for services rendered. Ongoing payment, which meant ongoing service. Her father had not merely sold information once. He had been in Linfield's employ since the week after William died. He had known. He had known, at some level, what Linfield had done and had chosen the quarterly deposit over his conscience, and had continued choosing it, right up to the letter, asking Clara Ashford to make Theodore stand down. She had not shown this to Theodore. She was going to use it first. The committee chamber was a long rectangular room with benches on both sides and a raised table at the far end where 3 commissioners sat with the specific air of men who would rather be somewhere else. Linfield was already present, impeccably dressed, accompanied by 2 solicitors. He saw Clara Ashford enter. His eyes moved to her, assessed her, dismissed her, the wife, attending on behalf of her husband. A softening strategy. He had seen it before. Clara Ashford took a seat on the public bench. The proceedings opened. The Land Committee clerk read the petition for enclosure. One of Linfield's solicitors rose to present the case. Managerial neglect. A historical pattern of estate underperformance. The argument that the South acreage under current management was failing its economic potential and should be transferred to a more productive stewardship. The lead commissioner turned to the Ironwood Estates representative, a solicitor named Mr. Carver, whom Theodore had engaged specifically for today. Carver was meticulous, thorough, and entirely too measured for what was needed. He presented the estate accounts. He presented the improvements to tenant conditions. He presented Aldred Hoof's statement. Linfield's solicitor objected immediately and smoothly. The witness was unknown, unverified, and his statement contained allegations of criminal conduct against Viscount Linfield that were inflammatory and improper to introduce in a civil proceeding. The commissioner nodded, set the statement aside. Pending verification. Carver looked at his papers. He had run out of road. Clara Ashford stood up. "Your pardon," she said. All 3 commissioners looked at her. Linfield turned. "I have documents I would like to submit to the committee," she said. She walked forward to the table, carrying a leather folder she had been holding in her lap. "These are financial records pertaining to a series of payments made by Viscount Linfield to Lord Ashford, the father of the Duchess of Windermir, beginning in the 3rd quarter of the year following William Fitzroy's death, and continuing quarterly until the present." She opened the folder and laid the pages on the table in front of the commissioner. The payments total, over the period of 4 years, approximately £9,000. Lord Ashford has no recorded business relationship with Viscount Linfield. No loan agreements, no contracts, no property transactions. The payments correspond to no legitimate commercial arrangement that I have been able to identify. She looked at the commissioner. "I submit that these payments represent compensation for ongoing intelligence regarding the investigations being conducted by Theodore Fitzroy, the Duke of Windermir, into the death of his brother William, and further that the origin and purpose of these payments is material to this committee's assessment of Viscount Linfield's motives in seeking the enclosure of the Ironwood South acreage. Silence. Linfield rose. His face was carefully controlled, but his left hand, at his side, had closed into a fist. "This is improper," he said. "The Duchess has no standing before this committee. The documents she is presenting are obtained through— By what authority have you obtained these records? These are private financial papers." "Obtained through a licensed solicitor acting on my behalf," Clara Ashford said, "using entirely legal means available to any private citizen. Which is why they are admissible." She turned to look at him directly. She thought, briefly, of her father's study, of two glasses clinking in the dark. "The question before this committee is whether Viscount Linfield has a legitimate interest in the productive management of the Ironwood estate, or whether his interest is in the elimination of its current owner. These documents suggest the latter. I believe the committee should have the opportunity to consider them. This is—" Linfield stepped forward. "This woman is—" "A duchess presenting evidence to a land committee," Clara Ashford said, "in a public proceeding, to which she is entitled by law to attend and, where relevant, to speak." She looked at the commissioner. "I am happy to answer any questions the committee has regarding the provenance of these documents." Linfield's jaw was very tight. He was controlling himself. She could see the effort of it, the machinery of it, the practiced social discipline that had kept him smooth and credible for years. But there was something behind it now. Something that looked, for the first time, like fear. "You have no idea," Linfield said, his voice dropping to a register that was not quite quiet enough for the room. "What you are doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Clara Ashford said. "I'm presenting evidence that a viscount has been paying my father to spy on my husband for 4 years, in pursuit of land above a coal deposit that does not belong to him, motivated by the murder of the man who stood in his way." She paused. "I would strongly advise you not to say the next thing you were going to say." Linfield looked at her. He looked at the documents on the commissioner's table. He looked at the 3 commissioners, who were now reading with great attention, and at the clerk, who was writing rapidly. He looked like a man watching a particular game come to a particular end. "This committee," the lead commissioner said, his voice carrying across the room, "will require time to review the submitted documents before proceeding. The petition for enclosure is tabled pending that review. Viscount Linfield, you and your solicitors are requested to remain available for further questioning. This session is adjourned." The room began to move. Linfield did not move. He stood at the center of the room, and he looked at Clara Ashford with an expression that had no social performance left in it, no warmth, no charm, no smooth indirection. What remained was pure calculation, and the cold, slow recognition that the calculation had failed. "Your father," he said quietly, "will pay for this." "My father," Clara Ashford said, just as quietly, "made his choices years ago. He will live with them." She picked up her empty folder. "You should find a very good solicitor, Viscount Linfield. A better one than you have now." She turned to go. Theodore was standing in the doorway. He was still in his riding coat. He had come straight from Ironwood, she realized, which meant Mrs. Radcliffe or someone had told him, or he had simply known. He was looking at her the way he had looked at her on the terrace in London, that first night, that first assessment, but the expression was entirely different. That first look had been a man calculating probabilities. This one was something else, something raw and undefended. She walked toward him. He said nothing. He held the door. She walked through it, and he followed her out into the cold gray air of a Leeds morning. And then they stood on the stone step, and he looked at her for a long moment. "The payments to your father," he said. "You found them in the records." "Yes." "How long have you had them?" "2 weeks." "You didn't tell me." "No." She met his eyes. "Because you would have confronted Linfield yourself, and this needed to happen in the committee room, in front of witnesses, where it could not be managed or suppressed. You needed to be able to say, truthfully, that you did not know your wife was going to walk into that room." She paused. "I was also paying you back." A moment passed. Something in his expression shifted. Not quite amusement, not quite anguish. Something compound and human, and entirely his. "For Harrogate," he said. "For Harrogate." He was quiet. Behind them, through the heavy door, they could hear the muffled sound of the committee room continuing its business. Before them, the street was beginning to fill with the mid-morning movement of the city. Carts, horses, a woman with a basket of bread, a boy shouting something indistinct from a doorway 3 buildings down. "My brother," Theodore said, "if the committee pursues it, if whose statement is accepted alongside your evidence, then Linfield will answer for what he did to William," Clara Ashford said. Theodore exhaled. It was a long breath, the kind of breath a man takes when he has been holding something for 3 years and has, finally, just slightly, begun to put it down. "He will fight it," Theodore said. "Every step. He has solicitors, he has connections in the Lords, he has a case that just developed a very large hole in it," Clara Ashford said, "and a committee chairman who is now reading a document that suggests a viscount murdered a duke to steal a coal seam. These things have a momentum of their own once they begin." She looked at him. "We have time. The enclosure petition is tabled. Your solicitor has house statement. The committee has the financial records. What we do not have yet is the letter from Linfield to the groom, the one you believe exists in the dead man's papers." "The widow in Northumberland," Theodore said. "We should go ourselves," Clara Ashford said. "Not a solicitor. Us. She will speak more freely to people than to lawyers." She paused. "I would like to go this week, if you are willing." He looked at her for another moment. Then he reached out and straightened the collar of her coat. A small, precise, entirely unnecessary gesture. The kind of gesture that is not about the collar at all. "Next week," he said. "We have the Southfield accounts to close first." "Next week," Clara Ashford agreed. They walked back to the carriage together, their breath clouding in the cold air, the city moving around them without interest or comment. The petition was tabled. Linfield was cornered. The case was not finished. It might not be finished for months, but the shape of it had changed, irreversibly, in the direction of truth. Her father was still out there. That would need to be addressed. But not today. Today, the ground was still there beneath her feet, and so was Theodore, and the 200 families on the Ironwood estate, and the coal in the South acreage that was not going to belong to Linfield. That was enough for today. That was more than enough. The letter from her father arrived without warning on a Thursday in early March, while the first true thaw of the year was turning the Ironwood courtyard into a river of mud. Clara Ashford was reviewing seed orders for the kitchen garden when Mrs. Gable brought it up. She set it to one side. She finished the seed orders. She poured herself a second cup of tea and drank it while the letter sat on the corner of the desk and occupied a specific quality of space. The way things do when you know they are going to be unpleasant and have decided to meet them on your own terms and in your own time. Then she opened it. It was not a letter. It was a notification from a solicitor in London, informing the Duchess of Windermere that Lord Ashford intended to present himself at the Ironwood estate on the 22nd of the month to discuss matters of filial obligation and family finances, in light of recent events. Recent events. The committee hearing in Leeds had taken 2 months to conclude. The result had not been dramatic, not the immediate ruin of Linfield that the angrier part of her had occasionally imagined. What it had been was methodical. The financial documents she had submitted had been accepted as evidence. Aldred Hoof's statement had been verified after a second deposition, and the enclosure petition had been formally withdrawn when 3 separate committee members declined to continue their association with a proceeding under criminal investigation. Linfield had not been arrested. Not yet. His solicitors were skilled, and his connections in the Lords were real. And justice, real justice, the kind with lasting consequences, moved through its apparatus at the pace of geological time. But the investigation had been opened, the file existed, and Linfield had retreated, for now, from the Ironwood estate, and from the north entirely. Her father had, in the wake of these events, lost Linfield's quarterly payments. He had also lost, apparently, another substantial sum in a card game the preceding month. Clara Ashford put the notification on the desk and went to find Theodore. He read it without expression. "He is coming," she said, "in 4 days." Yes. He will want money. Almost certainly. He will frame it as a father's reasonable expectation of support from his daughter. She paused. He may threaten to go to the press with the Harrogate incident, or to raise his original statement to Linfield in some new context. He has limited ammunition, but he is creative about using what he has. Theodore set the notification down. He looked at her. "What do you want to do?" She appreciated that. It was the question he always asked first now. Not, "Here is what I propose," or "Here is what we should do," but "What do you want?" And the want was genuine, a real inquiry, not a courtesy. "I want to handle it myself," she said. "All right. I may say things to him that are," she considered, "final. I know. You should be there, but I would like to speak first." Of course. Lord Ashford arrived on the 22nd at 2 in the afternoon, in a hired carriage that had seen better decades. He was thinner than she remembered. The gambling had done more to him than usual. His face was hollowed, the skin beneath his eyes bruised with the specific exhaustion of a man who has been kept awake by his own choices. He stepped into the entry hall and looked around at the stone walls, the old portraits, the quality of light coming through the narrow windows, with the expression of a man pricing the contents of a room he does not own. Clara Ashford stood at the far end of the hall. "Clara Ashford." He spread his hands. The old tone, the one that suggested they were both reasonable adults, that unpleasant subjects need not be revisited. "You look well. The North agrees with you." "Come into the study," Clara Ashford said. She led him to the room that was, by now, the most familiar room in the world to her. Her desk, Theodore's desk, the fire, the maps, the estate accounts in their ordered stacks. She sat behind her own desk. She did not offer him a chair. He sat down anyway, in the chair across from her, adjusting his coat with the small, unconscious vanity that had survived the years and the losses. "Difficult business, this Linfield affair," he said. "I want you to know, Clara Ashford, that I was placed in an impossible position. A man in my financial situation cannot. You were paid by Linfield for 4 years to report on my husband's investigation," Clara Ashford said. "You sent me a letter asking me to make Theodore stand down. When I did not, you threatened to provide a sworn statement against him. You were prepared to destroy the man I married, and the 200 families who depend on this estate. for quarterly payments from a man you knew had murdered a duke. She paused. I would like you to not explain your impossible position to me. Her father's face went through several expressions rapidly. He settled on the one he had always settled on when cornered. A kind of wounded dignity. The dignity of a man who believes his suffering is more significant than what he has caused. You are my daughter, he said. Filial obligation. I have a proposal, Clara Ashford said. He stopped. The estate makes charitable disbursements quarterly, she said. Among the recipients are 3 organizations that provide relief for people in financial distress: a debtors' assistance society, a workhouse reform charity, and a fund for the education of children whose parents cannot afford fees. I will direct the solicitor to add your name to the debtors' assistance fund. You will receive a monthly allowance of £15, sufficient for modest but dignified living, on the condition that it is not spent at any gaming establishment. She looked at him steadily. That is what I am offering you. The wounded dignity curdled. £15 is more than you would receive if I did nothing, Clara Ashford said. And you will receive it as a charitable recipient, not as my father, because the terms of a charitable disbursement do not require my personal involvement or my continued goodwill. If you accept this, we will have no further occasion to discuss family obligation or financial necessity. If you decline, I suggest you find another arrangement. She paused. I am not angry with you. I want to be clear about that. I stopped being angry with you a long time ago. I am simply done. The fire crackled. Outside the study window, the thaw had turned the moors from white to brown, and the first faint suggestion of green was beginning at the edges of things. Her father looked at her for a long moment. She watched him try several approaches internally. She could see them moving across his face like weather, and find each of them closed. Your mother, he said finally. His voice had lost its social register. What remained was older, quieter, and oddly more honest. She asks about you. She is welcome to write, Clara Ashford said. I will write back. A long silence. £15, he said. Yes. He looked at his hands. He was quiet for a moment, with a quality she had never seen in him before. Not calculation, not performance, just the plain fact of a man sitting with the consequences of 40 years of choices, in a room that belonged to his daughter, who had once asked him to protect her, and could not now ask him for anything. All right, he said. He was gone within the hour. The hired carriage crunched back down the ironwood drive and disappeared around the first curve in the road, and Clara Ashford stood at the study window and watched it go. Theodore came and stood beside her. £15, he said. It was fair. It was extraordinarily generous. It was the amount at which I could continue without guilt, Clara Ashford said. That is not generosity. That is self-interest. She watched the empty road for a moment longer. The thaw light was extraordinary. Pale gold, the particular quality of early spring in the north, where winter gives ground reluctantly, and the first warmth feels almost startling. He accepted it. Yes, I thought he might. She turned from the window. He was tired. People get tired of being a certain kind of person eventually. Some of them, anyway. Theodore looked at her with an expression she had learned to read over months of ironwood evenings, the particular look that meant he was about to say something that cost him something, not in the currency of grand declaration, but in the smaller currency of honest admission. There is something I need to tell you, he said, about Linfield, about what I have not yet said. She sat down. She waited. He sat down across from her, in the chair that had held her father 20 minutes ago, and he told her the rest of it. The parts he had still been holding, still managing, still deciding whether she needed to know or whether knowing would change something between them that he did not want changed. He told her about the weeks in Rome when William had written, begging for money to cover debts to a man he called L, and how Theodore had sent the money without asking questions, because William was William, and there was always a debt, and always a reason. He told her how he had understood, only after William died, and he began to examine the books, that the money had gone not to the debts themselves, but directly to Linfield, that William had been paying Linfield directly, for reasons that remained opaque, in a pattern that suggested something beyond simple gambling obligation. He told her that he believed, could not prove, but believed, that William had known Linfield longer and more intimately than the public record showed, that the relationship between them was not simply creditor and debtor. I think, Theodore said, that William owed Linfield something more than money, something he had done, or agreed to, or witnessed. And I think Linfield collected on it, finally, completely, when William's usefulness ended. Clara Ashford was quiet for a moment. That is why the groom's letter matters so much, she said. Not just for the physical evidence of the accident, but for what it implies about the whole relationship. Yes. And you have been carrying this for 3 years. Yes. She looked at him. Outside the window, the pale gold light had shifted, deepening toward the softer color of mid-afternoon. The moors were beginning, very faintly, to show green. "We are going to Northumberland," she said. "Next week," he confirmed. "And we are going to find the letter." "Yes. And after that—" She stopped. She looked at him. This man who had told her everything. In the end, all of it. In pieces and in stages, and at the exact pace at which truth could be absorbed without losing the thread. And she thought about what it meant to have built something real out of materials that were supposed to be insufficient, out of a sold name and a managed rumor and a marriage that was supposed to be cold. After that, she said, the Ironwood accounts need to be closed for the quarter, and I have a letter to write to Mrs. Gable about the spring plantings. And you have whatever it is you have been doing in the library at night, when you think I am asleep. "Reading," Theodore said. "Reading what?" He looked faintly caught. "Vitruvius," he said. Thomas left his annotated copy. Clara Ashford let out a short, startled, entirely genuine laugh. The widow in Northumberland was named Ellen Marsh, and she was 71 years old, with the steady eyes of someone who has been waiting to be asked the right question for a very long time. They went on a Tuesday, just the two of them, in the smaller carriage without the Windermere crest. Clara Ashford had brought shortbread, a practical decision based on the observation that people spoke more freely when their hands were occupied with something warm. Theodore had brought Theodore, which was, she had come to understand, usually enough. Ellen Marsh sat in her kitchen and looked at them across a table and said, without preamble, "He left papers. I knew someone would come eventually." The letter was where she said it was, in a tin box at the bottom of a chest of old linens, wrapped in an oilskin cloth. It was dated 11 days before William Fitzroy's death. It was brief and unambiguous, written in a hand that Linfield's own correspondence had since made familiar to both of them. It outlined, in the clipped language of a man accustomed to being obeyed, exactly what the groom was to do and when and how to ensure the gate latch would fail under the specific pressure of a horse refusing a jump. At the bottom, a postscript. Your brother's debt is your debt now. Remember that. The tin box went into Clara Ara's bag. They drank tea with Ellen Marsh and listened to her talk about her husband, who had regretted what he knew every day of his remaining life. And they thanked her, and they drove back to Ironwood in a silence that was different from all the other silences they had shared. Fuller, somehow, heavier with resolution. It went to the committee chairman the following morning. The investigation had its anchor. The rest would move at the pace of legal machinery, which was slow and unglamorous and absolutely necessary, and Linfield would find, over the coming months, that the architecture of what he had built was not as solid as it had appeared when no one was examining the foundations. He did not go quietly. He fought through 3 rounds of legal appeals, deployed every connection in the Lords, published through intermediaries a set of allegations regarding the Duchess of Windermere's improper conduct at the Leeds Committee, hearing that generated 2 weeks of renewed gossip. A business partner of the estate withdrew a contract for wool supply, citing the public controversy. It cost them £1,200 and 3 months of renegotiation to replace it. There was a week in October when everything seemed to hang, when the committee deliberations stalled and Linfield's solicitors filed for a postponement, and the weather turned genuinely brutal, and the Southfield drainage system failed and flooded 2 tenant fields. And Clara Ara sat up until 2 in the morning for 4 nights in a row, reviewing emergency budgets with Theodore by lamplight, both of them tired and irritable, and occasionally saying the wrong thing and then correcting it. And none of it felt like the sort of thing that appeared in books about triumph. But the drainage system was repaired. The committee deliberations resumed. Linfield's final appeal was denied in November, and the criminal investigation that had been quietly proceeding through different channels arrived at its result in December. Charges filed, assets frozen, the very systematic and boring machinery of actual consequence beginning to turn. Her mother wrote in January. The letter was careful, abbreviated, feeling its way. She asked about the estate. She asked about the cold. She asked, at the very end, almost as a postscript, whether Clara Ara was well. Clara Ara wrote back. She told her mother about the estate accounts and the spring planting plans and the fact that the north was extremely cold, but that she had stopped minding. She told her about Mrs. Gable and about Thomas Weston and his annotated Vitruvius. She told her, at the end, that she was well. She was. Spring came back to Ironwood in the way it always came, not all at once, but in argument with the winter, back and forth for weeks. A day of green, and then a frost, a thaw, and then a snow, until finally March gave way to April, and April gave way to something that was genuinely, irreversibly warm. The moors turned from brown to the extraordinary living green that Clara Ara had first seen from the ridge on horseback. Heather and gorse, and the long grasses bending in the wind off the sea, the whole landscape alive with a ferocious, quiet persistence. She was standing in the kitchen garden on an afternoon in late April when she heard the gate and looked up and saw Theodore coming across the courtyard from the stables with a letter in his hand and a look on his face she had learned to read exactly. Controlled on the surface and underneath it, something uncomplicated and clean. "From the committee," he said, holding it out. She wiped her hands on her apron and took it and read it, standing there in the warm April air with the smell of turned earth around her. Linfield's remaining assets had been formally assessed. The south acreage of Ironwood, the land above the coal seam, the land he had killed for, was to remain in the hands of the Duke of Windermir, unencumbered and undisputed. The investigation into the death of William Fitzroy, 4th Duke of Windermere, was concluded. Linfield would face trial in the autumn. She folded the letter. She looked at Theodore, He was watching her with the expression he wore when he thought she wasn't looking. The expression she had first seen in the carriage, traveling north through the hammered silver light, when he had looked at her face as she pressed her hand against the window and watched the landscape change. It was not the expression of a man in possession of something. It was the expression of a man who is surprised, still, after everything, to be this lucky. "Your brother," she said. "Yes," Theodore said. She crossed the courtyard. She put her arms around him, her forehead against his chest, and he held her in the kitchen garden in the April sun, and neither of them said anything for a long time, because there was nothing to say that the holding did not already say more precisely. They had a dinner that evening, not a party, not a formal affair, just the household. Mrs. Gable, the senior steward, Thomas Weston, who had been visiting for 2 weeks and would probably stay another 2, and a young woman named Alice Price, who had come on as Clara Ashford's secretary in January and turned out to have a gift for accounts that bordered on uncanny. They ate in the big kitchen rather than the dining room because the kitchen was warm and the dining room was large and drafty, and none of them had ever been particularly interested in performing the formalities of their situation. Mrs. Gable produced a roast. Thomas contributed a bottle of wine he had been carrying from London for 4 months, waiting for an occasion. "To what?" Thomas said, raising his glass. "Are we drinking?" Clara Ashford looked around the table, at Thomas with his slipping spectacles and his genuine pleasure in the company of people who did not exhaust him, at Alice Price, carefully not showing how much this dinner meant to her, at Mrs. Gable, who had kept this house alive through decades and was now, finally, watching it become something she could be proud of, at Theodore beside her, his arm resting against hers, warm and present and entirely, stubbornly real. "To the moors," she said. "To the moors," they said, and drank. 5 years passed, the way years do when they are full, quickly, without drama, in a series of ordinary days that accumulate, unremarked, into a life. Ironwood Hall lost its reputation for silence. It did not gain the reputation for fashionable entertaining that London might have preferred. No balls, no grand receptions, no glittering assemblies. What it gained was something harder to name, the particular quality of a house where the work being done inside it matters, where the people who move through it are there because they choose to be, and where the doors are opened from both sides. The south acreage was never mined. Theodore had surveys done, confirmed the coal seam, and concluded that the disruption to the tenant farms and the landscape above it was not a cost he was willing to extract. The income from the wool contracts and the improved grain yields was enough. It was enough. Their son, born on a winter morning in the 2nd year, arrived with his mother's sharp eyes and his father's inconvenient tendency to form opinions about things and express them without diplomatic preamble. He was named Edmund, after Theodore's father, and called by everyone from his first week's Ned, because Edmund was a great deal of name for someone who weighed 8 pounds and spent his early months primarily concerned with the logistics of staying warm. On a morning in his 5th year, Ned organized a military campaign against the household's most distinguished visiting scholar, stealing a stew-pot lid for a shield and enlisting the full support of Mrs. Gable's youngest kitchen girl as his standard-bearer. Thomas Weston fled the siege with more speed than dignity. The campaign lasted 45 minutes and concluded with a negotiated peace agreement brokered over a plate of biscuits. Clara Ashford watched it from the study doorway, a ledger on her hip, and thought, "This is what it looks like when a house is alive." Theodore came up behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, his chin on her shoulder, and they watched their son explain the terms of peace to a resigned Thomas Weston with the absolute confidence of someone who has not yet learned to doubt himself. "He is going to be exhausting," Theodore said. "He already is," Clara said. "He reorganized the kitchen accounts last week." "He is 4. He has opinions about the egg supplier." Theodore pressed a kiss to the curve of her neck. In the drawing room down the hall, Alice Price was reviewing the spring budget projections. In the kitchen, Mrs. Gable was producing something that smelled of cinnamon. In the library, Thomas was pretending to read while actually napping, a habit he had given up pretending to conceal. Outside, through the narrow windows, the moors were green and open and running all the way to the horizon in every direction, uninterrupted, belonging to no one and to everyone, the same as they had always been. "They pitied me," Clara said. "When we married, you remember?" Theodore was quiet for a moment. "I remember," he said. She turned in his arms and looked at him. This man who had let the world build a story about him because the story was less dangerous than the truth, who had spent 3 years alone with his grief and his calculations, and then, quite unexpectedly, not been alone anymore. He looked back at her with the expression that still, after everything, was difficult to look at directly. Not because it was too much, but because it was too real. And real things require something of you that comfortable things do not. "Let them," she said. He smiled. It reached his eyes. They closed the study door behind them, and the sounds of the house, the laughter from the hall, the clink of the kitchen, the wind off the moors coming through the old stone, surrounded them like something that had always been there, like something they had built, like home. Some arrangements are made in desperation. Some agreements are signed in the dark, for the wrong reasons, by people who have given up expecting anything from each other. This is not the end of those stories. It is sometimes, if you are lucky and stubborn, and willing to tell the truth at the precise moment when it is most difficult. It is sometimes only the beginning. The best things built between people are not built on what was expected. They are built on what was chosen, again and again, in all the ordinary moments that no one writes down and everyone eventually forgets to be afraid of.